Hello, and thank you for joining us for this webinar Wednesday. My name is Sharon, and I'm with SIPA, your Colorado Government Authority, helping you get more information and services online and offering Colorado government's grant funding. In today's webinar, we're going to hear from Qualtrics on leveraging resident experience for effective engagement. Before we get started, please go ahead and turn on captioning if you would like or if you need it. And note that during this webinar, you are muted. If you have any questions or would like to communicate with the presenters, please use the chat function in the Q&A during the presentation, and then we can unmute you and ask questions at the end. We have a post-webinar survey for you as well. We hope you will provide your feedback when you get to that. Please join me in welcoming our speakers, Jill Layden, Nathan Newman, Jordan Anderson, and Baha Koselli with Qualtrics. Thank you all for your time and what's sure to be an informative presentation. Also on the call is SIPA's Sales and Marketing Director, Beth Justice, if you have any questions for us. Thank you again for joining us today. And with that, I will turn it over to our guests.
Great. Thank you so much for having us today, Sharon. I thought we would just start with a brief introduction of who we have from Qualtrics. I'll start with myself. My name is Jill Layden, and I am the Vice President for Public Sector Strategy. And I use my time spent in government starting customer experience programs and experience management programs. I'm bringing that knowledge to Qualtrics to best serve our customers. It's a real pleasure to be with you all today. Baha?
Good morning, Baha Koselli. I cover the entire state of Colorado, so really excited to chat with everyone here today. Really excited to go through the resident experience and leveraging that and improving that. As Sharon had mentioned earlier, we will be monitoring the chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in there. I will take note of them and we will go over those questions at the end of today's presentation. Jordan?
Hey everyone, I'm Jordan Anderson. I am the state and local representative. I focus on cities and counties within Colorado.
Wonderful. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. We'll go to the next slide there, Jordan. So welcome, folks. We're really happy to have you with us today. We're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is leveraging resident experience and how to really effectively engage with communities at scale and be able to use that information to improve the experience of your residents and of the employees who power your organizations. So we'll just go over the agenda on the next slide here. We already did some welcome and introductions. We're going to start with the basics of, what is resident experience management? What do we mean when we say that? Why is it important? What is the value of understanding that experience? Some really nice real world examples of where this practice comes to life and benefits residents and leaders alike. We'll talk about technology that can power some of this progress and really enable governments to listen at scale to those they're serving, and some tools to take home with you to talk about a little bit of journey mapping and personas and how really anyone can use those tools to really think about an organization from the outside in. So we'll go ahead and get started. On the next slide, we're going to talk about experience management. We can use the term resident experience management, but it's really using information about experience to improve things for the people you serve and the employees who are powering your organization, so your staff members. On the next slide, there's really a visual of how I like to show what using human insight means to drive decisions. So you have experience, so what someone is thinking, feeling, and doing as they're interacting with your organization. And that experience is really an opportunity. It's an opportunity to either build trust or break trust. And when you're crafting those experiences and using information from those experiences to better inform your planning and decision making and design, we use the term experience management. So it's using that experience really to improve that experience and build trust. I like to use an example to really hit home what this concept is of going to the doctor. So it's something folks on this call have all done, most likely. And when you think about going to the doctor. There is so much more to that experience than that one-on-one interaction with your doctor, right? There is scheduling that appointment, filling out your paperwork, the parking lot, the check-in, sort of the triage area, filling out paperwork, sometimes multiple times online, in person, and then you're not so sure maybe if that person looked at your paperwork. And then, of course, that one-on-one. But it doesn't end there. Think about how you get your test results. What does that experience look like? So when you put all of those touch points together, that's what we mean when we talk about a holistic experience, or the experience. It's a sum of all of those key moments that matter to you put together. And you can picture leaders and practitioners and administrative staff being able to understand what that experience is like for you and making more informed decisions to help improve your experience. So that's a good example of thinking about just the very fundamentals of experience management. So we'll go to the next slide. I spent years working in government. Now it's been 20 years of being a federal employee. I got my start in the military for 10 years of active duty. I'm also a Marine Corps reservist now, nearing retirement. So when we put this slide together, I was thinking of the challenge of working in government and serving residents, right? And so I feel like it's, be efficient. Not costly though, right? You have to do that with always less money than you would like to have. You want to be responsive, but it can't be too risky. It's personalized. You want that personalized experience. You want it to be great for everyone, but it has to be built for everyone, and everyone has different needs. So we have these challenges as we're serving in government. And if we go to the next slide, this is how I like to talk about the view you have. So this is, sort of the tip of an iceberg, and the information you usually have going about your mission is plenty of information about the programs you're operating, the policies that govern them, and the services you provide. You often have information about the number of people you're serving, how much money you have to do it, how many people you are serving, and things like that. But we know that there is a lot more information out there. So if we go to the next slide, this is where we have, what is beneath the surface. There is more information that helps drive your ability to serve. So understanding on an individual level, needs, preferences, and priorities. Think about the different types of resident segments who you serve differing from one another. You can think about the satisfaction that people have with programs or services. How easy was it? Do you trust the information you're reading? How successful were you in being able to accomplish what you wanted to do? And then think about the why behind certain things. It's very often we understand what happens in a program or service or a process, but we don't always understand why. And it's really that beneath the surface that we'll talk about today, of being really intentional to get beneath that surface to help drive decisions and help really, I think, make planning and execution a little bit easier for leaders and staff. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So here is what I think a lot of us see very often. And this is, we'll just say it's a permit experience. And often we can go through a process and we may ask at the end, or if we are ourselves being served, get a question at the end, how did we do? Well, a lot of things happened right after that. So what could we possibly be missing if we do things in that way? And we'll go to the next slide and see that there are many things that can happen along the way in the experience, right? So you go on a website, you can, try to make payment. You might have a question and call a contact center, right? And there is a lot to think about those moments that matter across your journey. And if you're only simply asked at the end or not at all, it is really very difficult for the people operating that permit journey across an organization, often in siloed divisions, to really understand what that experience looks like. So that's why at Qualtrics, we talk a lot about understanding a resident journey or a customer journey, because being able to see and understand what residents are experiencing really can help broaden your view and help you understand and make decisions. Okay. So we just talked a little bit about what is experience. What do we mean when we say that? What is experience management? Using that information as a way of working and making improvements. So why would we go out of our way to intentionally get below the surface of that iceberg, which, it was below the surface that got the Titanic, the iceberg, right? So why would we, dig deeper and look? Well, there are real reasons and really consequences for not doing so. So we've brought some to you on the next slide. What it can lead to is services that are burdensome, laborious, hard to navigate, broken, or really just behind what modern technology can bring. And we have some stats here. So we have found that 1 in 6 people who are eligible to utilize the SNAP program, which is supplemental nutrition, actually use it. And that can be due to, not the awareness or difficult to navigate. We can find broken experiences. So I know this is the time of year when this might be on folks' mind, but filing your taxes and trying to comply with tax code, 9 billion hours are spent for U.S. residents filing taxes and navigating that code. And then we'll talk about this in a minute, but the cost of fixing failed technology rollouts. I don't know if anyone has experienced this. I personally have at a former, was working at a federal agency leading a customer experience for the agency, and just seeing the difference between doing things the right way and wrong way. Doing them the wrong way are always more expensive and costly, not just monetarily, but also reputationally. So we'll go forward and just talk briefly a good example from healthcare.gov. Now, this is an old example, yet it remains very relevant. So when healthcare.gov rolled out, there was a lot at stake for the Obama administration, right? So everyone's talking about healthcare.gov. They, followed the law to figure out what they needed to build. They hired experts to help. They invested in modern technology. They had a lot of visibility and support, and it was mission critical. But the site rollout was an absolute disaster. It crashed almost immediately because they had wildly underestimated the number of visitors they would get, and they didn't understand how people were going to experience the site, what their behavior on the site would look like. So in short, they were only seeing the tip of the iceberg. So on that day, only 6 individuals were able to select an insurance plan on healthcare.gov. There was public blowback, as you either remember or can imagine, and it was really a high-profile embarrassment for the government. It's very difficult. You had a lot of hardworking, diligent people doing their best, and it still, initially started that way. So we were fortunate enough to get involved after the fact to go and do listening at scale for healthcare.gov, so they could rapidly make improvements, really have a complete turnaround, and get going in the right direction. If we go to the next slide, you can see to fix the problem, and there were many problems, not just what I articulated, it costs $75 million. And that was, you can imagine, that includes the number of hours and the staffing required to fix as well, which really, you can imagine, got quite large. And again, the HHS, Department of Health and Human Services, they did a lot of things right, of course, but there were some things that, of course, they needed to think about when it came to that actual real experience, and thinking about who who is using it, how often, and why, that really could have led to a little bit more success. So we'll go to a little bit of a success story. If we go forward one, we somewhat recently, I think this was maybe a year or two ago, it was the Biden administration announced that COVID test kits would be sent to every household who wanted them. I'm not sure if anyone in this call went ahead and did that, but it was a massive operation, but it went very well. And the key difference here is that the organization the USPS and HHS as a whole really took experience into account and had far advanced their capabilities in using human-centered design, thinking about the people they were serving and all of the factors that impact that, to have what was largely a very successful, very complex organization operation. So we can see here how different that is. Now, we had 6 register successfully on healthcare.gov on the first day. As comparison here, on the first week of these COVID test orderings being available, 60 million households were able to order the tests in the first week. And that's nearly 8 million a day. So you can see a large contrast there. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. We just have one more example. This might hit home with some of you, anyone who is applying for federal student aid or who have children or family members who did this around this time last year. This is a great example of the Federal Student Aid Office having a large challenge ahead. They needed to overhaul the FAFSA form. So this is the form needed for students to fill out to see what they are eligible for regarding student aid. So it's absolutely critical. They needed to understand the diverse set of stakeholders they are serving, traditional, non-traditional, students from a myriad of backgrounds and circumstances. They had limited resources, a very tight deadline to overhaul this form, and at the same time, they needed to overhaul 20 legacy systems. So sometimes, I'm sure some of us can relate to having to work with legacy systems and how difficult that can be. So they took on a lot in a short amount of time. With limited resources. Unfortunately, it was a very troubled rollout. There were technical glitches, there were many design flaws, and things were overlooked. So if we go to the next slide, I like to use this visual here of just a calculation error and how many people were impacted by just one calculation error. 200,000 applicants experienced a calculation error that was very substantial. So you can see that seeing the stadium with approximately 200,000 people really brings home how many people were impacted by that. They didn't necessarily design for people who were first generation Americans, and that was a large swath of folks. The way the form was designed did not account for folks whose parents may not have a social security number, which you could see would be a large obstacle. So these are just a couple examples of why thinking about experience holistically and not just from the inside of the organization and being able to create things alongside residents with factoring their experience and their feedback can be so important. Okay, so we will go to the next slide here. And we are going to talk about some real world examples. And I'm going to turn it over to Baha to cover a few of these.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jill. Also, I think we may need to change that to Mile High Stadium for the next presentation.
You bet.
Jordan, if you could hit the next slide for us, please. Awesome. And what you're going to see here is not an all-encompassing list of all of the partners that we work with in the state of Colorado, but you're going to see some of the most interesting use cases. One that I would like to bring up is actually the HICPUF, Healthcare Policy and Financing Organization use case of the Qualtrics platform. Essentially, what they're doing is embedding listening posts throughout the life cycle, throughout the journey of an average Coloradan going through the HICPUF Peak portal. And similar to Jill's slide earlier, that shows breaking down those experiences across that longitudinal time can be very critical so that we're not missing very key milestones or issues that may be coming up. Another thing that you're going to get if you increase the listening posts is you're going to get more accurate data. You're going to get more data. And I think most importantly, you're going to get that actionable data. So in the use case of HICPUF, they are gathering information in a few different fashions. They are gathering post-application feedback. So once you have completed the application, gathering that feedback and figuring out where were the issues and how we can improve those overall experiences. There's also persistent feedback. So essentially, regardless of where you are in the journey, if you're researching, if you're actually filling out an application, or if you're just waiting for a response on your application, you have the ability to provide that feedback. That persistent feedback is key. And finally, HICPUF is looking at all of this in a single pane of glass via their experience dashboard so they can see the experiences in a holistic fashion. But not only doing that, but also integrating some operational metrics like how many folks are going through the application process, how many folks are finishing it, where are they getting caught up, what website did they come from, what website did they go to. Things of that nature allows for us to also add that why and the how to the what, which is that operational data that gives us the ability to paint a holistic picture of exactly what the folks that we're serving are going through so that we can improve that overall experience, both externally and internally. Jordan, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great, thank you. So, like I mentioned, I work with cities and counties of Colorado. This one particularly is for the city of Corona, California. And we'll go over a little bit of the cities that have been impacted positively while using Qualtrics experience management platform in Colorado as well. But to kind of go over the city of Corona, they didn't have a way of formally identifying issues with frustrating digital experiences on their website unless a formal complaint was made. So what they did is they used insights from our digital experience analytics to identify problems like a broken drop-down menu or experience gaps in online processes like applying for a permit. And they were kind of going off of a gut feeling instead of having insights and data to back them on answers on how they could fix those problems. So by using that digital experience analytics, they were able to have their residents feel heard and giving them opportunity to give feedback. By doing that and creating these listening posts all over the city, they saw a 10-fold increase in resident engagement. The next, I apologize. The next city I wanted to talk about is the city of Arvada. Recently, they had an open house council meeting where they needed to gather input and then create a report the next morning. And they were able to generate that report instantly as users chimed in and used those tools, and they made the process seamless. One super important use case that they have is they're able to utilize the platform in integrating their phone system with Qualtrics and having a post-call SMS text, which will give them valuable information in identifying areas for improved services and resource allocation. And the next city is the city of Fort Collins. As they kicked off their license with Qualtrics, they conducted an audit of their current software solutions, and they identified 50 plus known duplicate systems. The opportunity to consolidate data into one system and get rid of data silos and associated risks is huge. And not only does that help with the risk, but it also helps with significant cost savings and helps them put all their resident needs in one location. And I'll turn this back over to Jill.
Great, thank you. Those are fantastic examples. What we're going to do next is really talk about what does this technology look like to be able to, to operate like these cities. What do these cities do? You heard a little bit about it. We just wanted to give a very light touch, a small window into some of the things that Qualtrics does for cities and states and lots of organizations across the world. So we'll go forward and again, we could talk all day about our technology and our platform and all the things it does, but we thought that we would just do a quick hit on areas that fall in line with what we're talking about today in experience management for residents. So really put simply, we have technology that can allow you to gather ideas across stakeholder groups and inform all levels of decision making, everything from program to executive. 3 quick examples: being able to capture ideas quickly from residents, feedback very quickly from residents, and you can see there are many examples there, and we don't need to go through all of them. Also, getting ideas and feedback from employees can be very valuable. Often employees who are on the front line are the closest to residents. They understand that experience the best, and they can identify where there are friction points, needs for improvement, or where there are common confusion points. So being able to get feedback quickly from employees is essential, and not just about how service is going, but their individual experience. So we do talk a lot about employee experience. I know the focus today is resident experience, but we also do lots of work to help governments understand the experience of their staff members and improve that as well, which, as we all know, goes hand in hand with resident experience. And then we've talked a little bit about continuous listening at scale, and that experience management approach of just really bringing residents to the center of what you do and being able to listen across a journey. And we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like moving forward on the next slide. Put simply, we like to think of what we do in 3 phases of being able to collect anywhere customers are, anywhere residents are, being able to get information about their experience, no matter whatever that touch point looks like. That can be anything from basic surveys to what we call conversational analytics in phone calls and unstructured data in survey responses that may not be quantitative data, rather qualitative. So taking lots of feedback that is not structured and being able to make sense of that, which leads us to being able to analyze and prioritize what that information is saying and what to do with that. And then most importantly, being able to take action on that information, whether that's improving design, making decisions, and perhaps deploying new solutions. Okay, go to the next slide here. We talked briefly about this of employees and residents. Really, residents are the experts in their own experience, of course, and then employees, ones who are particularly close to working with residents and serving them, have that direct line of sight into what is going on. So making sure that we are listening, being able to collect that information to understand what improvement opportunities are there and how can we improve that service delivery experience. Go to the next slide. And these are just a couple great examples I like to share of being able to listen and share ideas for improvement and soliciting, how can we do better, having a flexible listening approach there. We'll go to the next slide. I call this a digital suggestion box. So we have a lot of customers who essentially have a place where residents can go to share ideas and feedback at any time. This can be on a topic of their choosing. This does not only have to be when we are asking about a specific topic, right, as government staff, but more so on the terms of residents, listening, where they are and when they are ready to give feedback. It's certainly much improved over some of those unused paper suggestion boxes that I think can still be seen in certain areas, often without paper or pen, just sitting locked. This is a great way to be able to get more information. And then the next slide, of course, is getting those insights to leaders and staff who are making decisions. about how to operate programs, how to lead people, and how to really prioritize, what to work on first. This is information that could come with lots of useful analytics to make that decision-making process much easier. And we'll go to the next slide. This is my favorite, talking about human-centered design. We actually do whole workshops on human-centered design, and we have digital tools that allow teams who are conducting research and doing human-centered design to do so at scale, taking what often used to be a very analog process and making it much more efficient and effective. Being able to do that at scale, you can see some of the tools. We collect video feedback and provide those summaries using AI. We can do A/B testing, tree testing. Those of you who are in the web business, you'll see these are very familiar tools, and we certainly help teams do lots of portal overhauls or website overhauls, or just listening to see how their websites are going. We'll go to the next slide here, and we've already talked about our main areas of listen, understand, and act. Okay, we'll go to the next slide. So this is our last section. I just want to spend a couple minutes. I know, we are an experience management company. We have, lots of technology. I think it's really important when you are, putting on a webinar that you have lots of different folks with you, and you may or may not be using Qualtrics. You may or may not be in an area that would leverage something like Qualtrics. But regardless of that, there are two really techniques and things I wanted to share today that anyone can use regardless of access to technology. Of course, these can be greatly aided by technology like Qualtrics, but the concepts can be applied in many areas of what you're doing. So we'll go to the next slide. So journey mapping. Quick, if you've seen journey mapping, I think our chat is open. If you've heard of journey mapping or seen journey maps, if you just want to put any sort of emoji in the chat, we'll see if we have any folks who are familiar with this. I'll do my own. I'll put a smiley face. All right, we've got a couple here. Okay, we've got a couple. All right, we'll see if some more pop up. Here we go. Okay. I see the Qualtrics team certainly put some emojis in. Well done. Good job. Okay, so then I will go through the fundamentals of journey mapping. It seems like it would be useful to this crowd. So what is a journey map? You heard me talk about the resident journey through an experience and those moments that matter. You've heard me talk about going to the doctor in that experience. What would that journey map look like? So a journey map is really a visualization of those major interactions that shaped an experience, like going to the doctor or like getting a service from a city or state government or navigating a touch point of service. And so why would we think to put together a journey map as people who are operating one of those programs? It really helps you understand what it looks like and gives you a new way to think. So as you're doing customer research, as you're trying to think about where should you be listening, if you are looking at a journey map that really represents what people are experiencing, you can optimize that, and you will be able to see, are there some gaps that we can listen, and can we discover some pain points looking from the perspective of a resident. We'll go to the next slide, because often we are looking from this perspective, from that, you can click forward, the perspective of our internal organization. We know our departments, we know who our leadership is. So we see the world this way, but often our customers, our residents see it in a different way, right? And so getting those phases of what that journey looks like and just mapping that out on paper and taking a moment can be very helpful. We'll go to the next slide. So why would we do that? You are able to, really have a shared understanding with the people you're working alongside of what that journey looks like. You're able to build up a little bit of empathy for what, you can click forward one. for what someone is experiencing as they're navigating, and really start to go towards a more resident-centered government. We'll go to the next slide, please. We talked about, this is what it looks like sometimes, very often. We'll click forward a couple there, Jordan, till we get to that permit journey with color, because there we go. So really, if you just think about from your seat how things look very different if you're looking at the journey from the resident perspective and the types of things they're doing and seeking to do and what they might be experiencing, that can be highly, highly beneficial. I don't know, Baha, did you want to talk about journey mapping and what might be coming up for folks in terms of workshops?
Yes, actually, thank you so much for the suggestion. I just put it in the chat. We have information around the SIPA regional workshop, which is going to happen on April 2nd in Colorado Springs. So the folks that are around the Springs, more than welcome to join. There will be a more official invite sent out by the SIPA team shortly. So more to come there. Just wanted to send some excitement your way.
Thank you so much. We could talk quite a bit about journey mapping. We have folks who go to that workshop walk away with a journey mapping toolkit where you can sort of host your own sessions in your areas, and really being able to take people through step by step, being able to step out of your shoes as someone who is, leading in an organization, working in an organization, and put on your customer hat and think about the stages and phases that people go through as they navigate. Be very helpful. We also are able with Qualtrics technology to be able to aid all the information you would have at your disposal to help build journey maps and understand with real metrics, and real metrics and real measures of what does satisfaction look like across the journey. Is it up here and then at a certain point it comes down? Why? So anyway, we love to host those workshops and share a little bit more. Okay, so we'll move on to our second technique of personas. So I'll point over to the chat again. If you're familiar with personas, what they are, you might have seen them in your personal life or work life. Go ahead and put an emoji in of some sort, or typing in the chat, and we can see who might have that experience. Lynn, okay, got a couple. Okay, yep, a couple, that's great. All right, I'll keep an eye on that. So personas are fictional characters that organizations create to represent a segment of customers they're serving. So in an ideal world, this is being based on qualitative and quantitative data that you have gotten through listening at scale to your residents. So ideally, you have information coming from those you're serving to help educate you on, who they are, different customer segments, and we'll go through, what those can look like. But it really helps you understand who you are serving. When you stop to think about who your residents are and the different types of segments that are out there, it's not, being a resident is not a monolithic experience, right? You all know certainly better than I do how different groups of folks have different needs, expectations, and priorities. And so having personas can help in the process of making decisions, even designing policy, designing services, online portals, websites, forms, you name it. Having personas and centering on who you're serving can really help you navigate through the perspective of others. It also helps you make sure that as you're ideally getting feedback early on in a design process, whether that's a policy, program, or service, that you're getting feedback from real residents from different customer segments that might line up with the personas that you've designed for. So getting that real feedback in the door is also important. We don't want to be over reliant on personas, but that is really how to get started in thinking from the outside in, and from that human insight perspective. Okay, We'll go to the next slide here. This is just a quick example, and it's really to show you some, there are a lot of different ways to do personas, but these are just some areas you can think about. So this is Marina. She's a school teacher and she is 35. She is navigating a process that is very difficult, and thinks that there has to be a better way for this to happen. This is something that, you know, in every area I've worked, leading customer experience, we had personas. And we could see as we were designing how each person would want to navigate something differently. If they were a customer who was very frequent, we'll say applying for a permit. If it's someone who does it very like constantly all the time, they're going to be able to probably navigate the system they've learned very differently from someone who's visiting for the first time. So in this case, Marina is a single mom. She has 2 school-aged kids. She lives in an urban area. She has needs and goals that are going to be different than others. So thinking about needs and goals, and that can be based on real customer segments and information coming in the door. We can think about technology use. Not every resident is going to be a tech expert. Some are still going to be perhaps on paper-based comfort levels. So technology use should be brought into consideration, what some of their pain points are or can be, and then as a designer, thinking about a program or policy, or even as a decision maker, what are some of the considerations that you would want to take into account there? So an example here, design consideration would be bilingual resources, because Marina has told us that English is her second language and that her language of choice and her household language is Spanish. So understanding that is critically important to make sure that things are accessible and understandable, and also written in plain language. There are a multitude of languages spoken, and we do have modern technology today of, you know, automatic browser translations. And when folks are using those, it's very important that the information that is published in English on our government websites is written in plain language, is not full of legalese, but is, even if it's a complex topic, that it is put as simply as possible so that folks using those tools have an increased likelihood of being able to access that information if everything is not translated. I have a great example, a real example from the state of Washington on the next slide. And personas can be done a lot of different ways, but the state of Washington was building or redesigning a resident portal. And so this is something, this can be found online. So this is not, you know, a private document. This is something that the state of Washington openly shared. And they had some stories put together about who would be using their portal. So as you can see, they put, you know, pictures and characteristics. They were able to name the customer segments, you know, someone who needs timely assistance, someone who may have unreliable income, someone who has, you know, been kind of given the statewide shuffle back and forth, and just the perspective that they would bring to this portal. And this really helped the team that was putting together this portal center on some of the key customer segments that they'd be serving and thinking about their goals and needs as they put that together. What is very important in this story is not just having personas and designing very intentionally, but also throughout that entire experience, getting some feedback from real customers in those testing phases and having a listening strategy all the way from tip to tail. So as something is rolling out, being very intentional about gathering feedback at scale with a platform like Qualtrics, and then as things are rolling out and being used habitually and now completely rolled out, you know, things change, feedback changes, and then you're able to be very agile in your updates. And, you know, when you're thinking about what is going to be next, what do we need to tweak? How can this inform future design? You're able to get that information continuously in the door and really have that complete cycle of design, development, and deployment using feedback from those you're serving. So I really like these examples. Okay, let's go to the next slide. We're just gonna do a little bit of wrap up, and then we've left about 15 minutes for anything that I might have missed, Baha, Jordan, Nathan, and then questions from folks who have attended. So really in this resident experience webinar, we were able to go through, what do we need? What do we mean by resident experience and resident experience management? What are some of the technology tools that are available to help enable governments to do that at scale? And then some real world example of customers who have used Qualtrics very successfully to lead to better resident outcomes and organizational outcomes. And then we went through some tools that anyone can use and ways of thinking and ways of working to help become more resident-centered in all that you do. Baha, Jordan, Nathan, is there anything that I might have missed that we should cover before we go to Q&A?
Nope. I think you did an incredible job, Jill. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Sharon, Beth, is there anything to mention that we might have missed before we go to questions?
No, you did fabulous.
Great, thank you. All right, folks, I would love to see if there are any questions or things we can further discuss with the time that we have left.
Please do raise your hand and I will get you unmuted. Or throw it in the chat if you'd like.
As we're coming up with a couple questions, I will go to one that I'm frequently asked. And one of them is how, often I'm speaking with folks who might be familiar or an advocate for human-centered design or experience management or, improving customer service. And they say, Jill, how do you get people on board, right? How do you get leaders whose support you need on board? How do you build champions? And I will say that the thing that helped me build success over time with some of the most difficult, difficult to persuade leaders was understanding what their goals and priorities were and really lining up to those operational goals and being able to make a connection between these type of approaches and this type of technology and how it can positively impact those operational goals. I will give a very brief example. I used to lead customer experience at the US Patent and Trademark Office. And one of my toughest to persuade folks was the commissioner of trademark operations. And this is the person who oversaw all of the trademark attorneys who were examining all of these trademark applications throughout the world. And she had been at the agency for probably 30 years and had been a trademark attorney her entire career. And so it was really hard for her to understand that customer experience of maybe a first-time business owner seeking trademark protections. And I said, okay, tell me what you care about. What are the metrics that matter to you? And one of them was how long it takes to examine a trademark application for her staff members. And being able to articulate that the clearer information is coming to customers, the more likely they are to be able to do that successfully and correctly, and the easier it is to examine for her trademark attorneys. And also telling her that if we were able to identify from her own staff members the most common preventable mistakes customers make and the customers that, or the problems that take the longest for those trademark examiners to go back and forth to get fixed. And we could save, what would it mean to save a mere 5 to 10 minutes of each examiner's day? And she said that would bring pendency down tremendously, right? And so one of our first projects, those quick wins that I needed to showcase to be able to make some progress, was to be able to tackle those issues and really show that value right away. And that took, to be able to do that, listening to our customers at scale and asking them the right questions to get meaningful answers to help drive that change and see those really tangible business outcomes.
Awesome. Thank you, Jill. And I believe there's a question from Alexander, and I can take part of the question, and Jill would love your feedback here as well. Jordan, do you mind going back to the partnering with Colorado slide 19, please? Alex, to answer your question, there's a plethora of use cases across the state at a city, county, and statewide level. And each of these use cases can be very, very different from one another. A couple that I can mention here. So CDOT, an example there is they're working on a couple of new projects across the state, and they'd like to gather feedback from the residents that live in the area. That's one example of how CDOT is utilizing the platform to gather feedback, and that is going to really help them prioritize, improve overall transportation infrastructure, and really prioritize those enhancements or adjustments or changes that need to happen based on feedback rather than just listening to the loudest voice in the room. And I can get to that here in a second. CDHS example, there's a plethora of licenses across the entire agency. One of them is an internally facing license that is used to understand what is keeping my employees engaged. What can I do to improve the overall experience so that we're retaining those productive and effective employees? Because we all know, unfortunately, in the public sector, there's a plethora of folks that are leaving for maybe other public sector roles or other private sector roles to have that flexibility, for example. So we really need to get tight in understanding what is causing those effective and proficient employees to stay with us. Another example, you see RTD there. This is a very similar use case. It's not RTD that is utilizing this, but an example would be one of the largest transportation authorities that we work with in the country came to us, and they had a plethora of folks that were leaving and wanted to understand. And yes, the loudest voice in the room was paying benefits as to why they were leaving. But we got down to brass tacks and figured out that it was actually coffee in the break room was the number one reason why people were leaving. And the reason why I like to bring that story up is because it's a very slight change that they could have made, and it would have probably cost the county $6,000 a month, and that's for the good stuff. But they were spending about $5 million in just overtime because so many people were leaving. So again, it's really finding those opportunities to listen to the folks that we're serving both internally and externally. And to the second part of your question around what do you think about how, what, and when to measure, it's frankly going to be different for each of these use cases. It's, what are those touch points? How many milestones? What are those key milestones that we're interacting with the folks that we're serving? And I think more than, when do you reach out to them? It's more meeting your clients or the people that we're serving where they are. And so what I mean by that is rather than just sending out an email and assuming that they're going to open the email, maybe there's a sub-segment within the folks that you're serving that don't have an email or that don't look at their emails very often. So maybe having a consistent feedback button on the website may be the best way to go. Or maybe bringing in IVR technologies or bringing in something into the call center. For example, maybe a better way to gather that feedback. It's again going back to the longitudinally listening to these folks that we're serving and meeting them where they are in that journey. And Jill, I believe you had a couple of things to add.
Yes, yes. In fact, I can share my screen. That way, if folks want to like screen capture my screen. Oh, it will not let me share. I don't know why. Nope, it will not let me share. Okay, I'm not sure why. That could be a setting, I'm sure, on my end, and my apologies. So I will actually send a link to Baja, but in the meantime, when you talk about, in fact, here I am. we're going to go to slide 15. I'm going to send it right over to the host and panelists. You all can pull it up and share it. Sorry for the delay, folks. So as we're moving to that, you're going to see a screen that says set, measures, and see value. And it goes through to answer the second part of that question of how do you know what to ask? Where do you measure? I like to think of it in 4 stages. So beginning with the end in mind, a good Stephen Covey, what's the value? What's the desired outcome you want to see? The second thing is action, the decisions that the insights that you get in the door are going to drive, because you don't want to ask questions to get the information in if you're unwilling to make change, right? So after you think of the value and the action, next you think of the methodology. What are the questions you would want to ask? And then finally, you think about where to ask those. Usually it's the other way around. Everyone thinks about the touch point first. If you're thinking holistically, that could be just very helpful, I think. But I like to go through primary purpose. Why? So when we think about questions, why would somebody be asking? In fact, maybe I'll put these right in the chat. And then we don't even need our screen anymore if we don't want to. I'll put it right in the chat. Oh, it's not letting me do that either. Not sure why that's. Here we go. Success. Okay, so here you'll see. Okay, so we can all just look at the chat here. Think about why someone is coming to visit that particular touch point. You can say, what of the following, which of the following best describes you? So we think about that audience segment. Were you able to accomplish what you needed? What was the degree of difficulty? How satisfied are you? How clear was the information you came across? Those are some of the drivers overall. So just focusing on those top 2 can be really helpful. And then always ask an open text question. What more can you tell us about your experience? So if you're just getting started, just some of those first 6 areas right there can be really helpful. And then always ask an open end. So that's just some granular detail.
Yep. And there is another question from Anna around engagement methods or mediums that are accessed by a younger demographic. And yes, that is definitely something that we can help with. There's a plethora of ways, medium agnostic, channel agnostic. So whether that's gathering data from social media, Google, call center is another one. We can also do QR codes, SMS. There's a plethora of ways that we can gather that data.
Excellent.
What a great question. I can take this one. Do you have any recommendations on capturing and measuring trust? We do. So it's very interesting. We have this conversation all the time. There are a couple ways. Sometimes you can ask directly when it's transactional. When it's, post-transaction, you did something very specific. Did this experience increase your trust in the organization? The federal government has made a lot of progress on customer experience, and trust is actually a required question for transactions. The guidance we give customers who have a little bit more flexibility, we recommend some drivers of trust like reliability and consistency and things like that. So we like to, if you can, think of the drivers, and we can help customers with this also when you're thinking about your methodology. We advise on this certainly because you want to make sure you're asking the right questions. We think of what comprises overall trust and ask questions specifically about that. And again, reliability, consistency can be questions that help drive trust. So we take customers through those exercises and help advise them on their methodology, so that if you have, the space to be able to ask about drivers of trust, we prefer that because it gets behind that overall experience and feeling of trust. And then some customers will ask specifically after a transaction, if, did that experience increase your trust in the organization?
Great question there.
Thank
All
you. Great
right.
question, Lynn.
Well, we have reached time, so I'm going to go ahead and let you all go so we don't keep you in your day. Please don't hesitate to contact any of us if you have any follow-up questions, you want to learn more about this, you want to get a quote, whatever. Beth and Dwayne are here to help you with that, as well as the Qualtrics team. Please save the date for our upcoming webinar Wednesday on March 26th with CapTech. They will be talking about the essential steps to take to reach your accessibility compliance, because we've got that countdown to July 1st. We'll have more scheduled in April and May, so keep checking back on our website, sipa.colorado.gov, and make sure you're subscribed to our monthly newsletter where we make those announcements as well. We've got our survey out there. Hopefully you will fill that out and get back to us with some feedback so we can keep making these wonderful for you. And we'll also get this webinar up on YouTube so you can watch it again later, pick out those favorite parts you wanted to review, or send it to any colleagues that you have. Thank you again for your day, and to the Qualtrics team for their information and their time. We really appreciate it, and we will hope you all have a great day.
Thank you.